Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Perez coming to you from Baltimore. In Africa, 20 of the 54 countries are classified as fragile states. They account for approximately 20% of the continent's population. In addition to lower per capita income, these countries lag behind in basic social and economic indicators of health, nutrition, and education. While poverty, inequality, weak institutions, and low development in general are the result of such fragility, they also undermine the very effort to improve things. But some people are trying to do so to improve the conditions in these countries, and that is the topic of our next discussion with Leonce Ndikumana. Leonce is professor of economics at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. He's the director of the African Policy Program at the Political Economy Research Institute, also known as PERI, and the author of the paper Capital Flight from Sub-Saharan African Countries. Leonce, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for the time and the opportunity.
So Leonce, PERI and the African Development Bank engaged high-level civil servants in a workshop in Dakar, Senegal recently in an effort to address some of the gravest issues facing fragile states, as you have defined it, mainly the kind of reform required at level of institutions. Give us some sense of what you presented to them.
Thank you so much. So as you said in your introduction, Africa accounts for a large number of countries which are classified as fragile states. And these are countries which have problems in terms of delivering on economic, from the economic development front, in terms of social service delivery, but also have problems delivering in terms of on the security side. You find that there are countries that have hard time establishing security throughout their territory, and all these two combined to make it difficult for the states to enforce credibility, to have credibility vis-a-vis the people and vis-a-vis the global community. And when you look at these countries, it's also the case that these are countries where the quality of policy is weaker, the quality of institutions is much weaker, the technical capacity is much weaker than in stable countries. So in addition to the need for financing and aid, which the international community has always typically focused on, these countries actually need to develop stronger capacity to design and implement economic reform, including institutional reforms, which was highly profiled in our workshop. So in the workshop, we focused on how to design and implement reforms that are going to both minimize the risk of recurrence of conflicts in these countries, because you realize that the majority of them are countries that have actually come out of conflicts, but at the same time establish a basis for sustainable development. These include economic reforms from say fiscal policy, monetary policy, financial policy, employment policy, but also they include institutional policies, basically establishing institutions that are more capable, more transparent, more accountable, that can deliver on the development agenda. And these institutions are critical because one of the things that you want to establish in these countries is to turn the page from the era of inequality, marginalization, exclusion, so that you have a more participatory polity, a more participatory economic development strategy.
So I understand looking at institutions, reforming them, making them more robust and effective is a good thing, but so is the role of fiscal policy. And I understand that you were advocating this as an instrument of state building. What do you really mean by that, and how does that work in these fragile states?
Yes, that's a very, very important question. One of the things that needs to be done in fragile states, especially those that are overcoming conflict, is to rebuild the economy. You need to rebuild the infrastructure. You need to create the human power. But that cannot be done unless you have a capable state, a state that has the capacity to mobilize resources effectively and to allocate the resources effectively. Here we're talking about fiscal policy. So in those countries, you find that the fiscal base is very narrow because the economic activity has been destroyed, but also trade has been brought to a standstill. But also you have that in these same countries, generally you have very weak, high levels of corruption, which basically result in leakages of fiscal resources. The meager resources that are being collected, some of it is being embezzled and leaks through into private pockets. So you need to build both the technical capacity to design good tax systems that can mobilize the optimal amount of resources that are available, but at the same time to minimize the leakage of resources. So that's on the revenue side. On the fiscal, on the expenditure side, you need to increase efficiency in terms of minimizing waste of money in public expenditures. But at the same time, fiscal policy must be seen as a tool for addressing social issues like inequality, marginalization. In many cases, you'll find that the war and the conflicts emerged from conflicts arising from distribution of national wealth, in the sense that some regions, some parts of the population benefited more from state services than others. So in the post-conflict settings, you need to design public expenditure strategies that minimize those inequalities. In fact, in some cases, you need to design expenditure strategies that bridge the gaps that existed between the advantaged regions, for example, and the disadvantaged region in terms of, for example, infrastructure, road infrastructure. You'll find that in some countries, the infrastructure has privileged the regions that are the origin or the homes of the ruling elite. In that case, after conflict, you need to design expenditures that provide services to the marginalized segments or regions of the country. Similarly, from a horizontal perspective, again, you'll find that some groups of the population may have been excluded from the economy, from the mainstream economy. In that case, fiscal policy has to involve transfer mechanisms, where some of the marginalized segments of the population are given resources to rebuild their lives through preferential treatment in terms of access to employment, preferential treatment in terms of access to government procurement contracts. An example would be, for example, to give preferential treatment to youth enterprises, to women-owned enterprises, so that when there are projects that are funded by external aid, or government money, these enterprises should be given priority in delivering the services that needs to be delivered under those projects.
Leonce, when you're talking about leakages and a better tax system here, you're talking about basically tax evasion and forms of corruption. These are very sensitive issues in some of these states. Did you find a willingness to want to address them?
That's, again, an excellent question. The issue of tax evasion is not only in the case of fragile states, but you realize that tax evasion hurts more the countries that have little. So tax evasion will hurt more the fragile states because they have even a lower tax base. The public is aware of the problems of tax evasion, but as you said, it's a political issue because those who benefit from tax evasion are the more politically powerful, the political and economic elite, both domestic and foreign. In fact, a key player in one of the big guilty parties in tax evasion is multinational corporations. But those multinational corporations are able to evade taxes because they take advantage of the loopholes in the tax system, but they're also able to bribe and corrupt the local leaders so that they pay very little from their profits. In fact, we find that in many cases, major multinational corporations pay less than your ordinary citizen, which is vastly unfair in terms of the responsibility as a citizen, but also it really erodes the tax base of the country and robs the countries with vast amount of tax revenue.
And Leonce, so educating and trying to inform some of the civil servants who has the capacity to make decisions on these items or these problems that states are faced with is one thing, but for them to go back and try to introduce these in terms of reform, institutional reform and legislation and so on is again another huge hurdle to cross. What kind of assistance did they ask for in terms of being able to mobilize these ideas that you came up with?
Yes, the participants that we work with in these workshops are senior policymakers. You're talking about the level of director general in the ministries of finance and the central banks, but in this particular case, also in the ministries in charge of resettlement, post-conflict resettlement, refugees, gender and youth. The primary objective, the first objective of the workshop is to provide these decision makers with the technical tools to allow them to diagnose the problems, establish the strategies to address the problems, and so that they can actually improve on the way they design their policies. So it's improving the quality of policy making. But the second objective is to get to increase public awareness of the issues, of the magnitude of these issues, but also increase the public debate on what can be done so that everybody who can contribute can contribute. The toughest part, as you indicated, is getting this to be implemented, getting this to the attention of the higher levels of the government, because there are two aspects of policy implementation. There is a technical policy aspect, which is being able to design a convincing policy or strategy. But the second component is political will. You need the top-ranking, the top leaders of the country to actually be willing to reform and willing to change, willing to embark the countries at a higher level of development. And when there is political will, there is going to be a way, because first of all, people are going to be able to use their full capacity, but also even in terms of the international community will be more willing to support countries where they see that there is political will for reform.
Leonce, I know that you, in addition to sort of trying to unpack what some of the issues holding states back have been, you also discussed some of the progress that some states have been making. So let's take that up in the next segment of this interview.
Yes, yes. As you indicated, in the continent, there are, of course, a large number of countries that are still struggling to overcome from conflict. Some of them, you see, then they revert to conflict because the institutions have not been solid enough. But we also have to underscore the fact that some countries have actually made substantial progress. One example would be to indicate countries that are post-conflict countries, which are not fragile states, which means that they were able to, over time, minimize the risk of fragility, minimize instability. An example is Mozambique. It's a post-conflict country, but it's not.
Leonce, can I interrupt you for 1 second? I wanted to, at that juncture, I wanted to end that segment and start a second one, because we are a bit long now. We are almost into 15 minutes or so. So can I end this segment, and then we'll start another segment on the illustration of some of the more positive progress that's been made, okay?
Sure.
Okay,
sure.
Here we go. So, so I will state that and say, well, thank you so much for joining us on this segment, Leonce.
Thank you very much again.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.